Good afternoon, everybody. With fear and trembling, I'm sharing with you about the topics of grief. And funny enough, earlier this week, one person sent me a document about grief counseling. This person say it can help you in your devotion. And at that time, I didn't know what topics I'm going to share. And when Pastor asked me to take today, and which is on yesterday's studies on grief care, and I was telling myself, my goodness, what a difficult topics about grief care. But lo and behold, if that person has given me this book, and I will try to pick out something um, from this book. So this is basically a disclaimer here. If you disagree, please write to the author, right? and don't dispute what I say. So I titled today's sharing is about reattached again, reattach again, and majority of what I'm going to share is based on this book, okay, by J. William Warden. The title is Grief Counseling and Grief Therapy. You can find it in a bookshop. Yeah. I'm not sure whether the author is a Christian, but this book, okay, is used in Bible seminary. So the person that sent me this book, okay, uh, teach in a Bible seminary. So this book should be quite relevant for us to read, and probably we can pick out some good points there. If times permit, like I say, what I'm sharing may be very academic, but it is something which I found out that it helps in our understanding when we want to counsel, when we want to care for somebody. Okay, the beauty of it is sometimes as we go through grief, everything to us is natural. Okay, but once we have things in place in a very structured manner, suddenly it dawned on me, no wonder this is happening. Now I understand why this is happening. So in the grief counseling or giving care, or when we want to reach out to somebody, what the book emphasizes on, it is also a common so-called practice. Okay, it's what they call the attachment theory. Okay, what is attachment theory? That we have a natural instinct to attach. Okay, and what does it mean? For example, when a fetus still in the mother's womb, it is attached to something. When a baby is born, it's attached to the mother's breast for nourishment. Okay, when a toddler is walking or learning to walk, is holding on to the parent for reassurance and safety. So that is attachment. So God has created human being, and we are wired to attach. Okay, so during the death of a loved one, so this is where the pain and the struggle came in during detachment. Okay, so we are detached from something. So because of this detachment, we experience grief. And this is, as we know, there are some people say they are human has seven emotion. And this grief, okay, is the most painful of human emotion. Okay. So it's broken down, there are five types of attachment. And it is depending on what they call the strength or the intensity of love. How strong the attachment is depending on your love, your intensity, the magnitude of your love, okay, to your loved one. The other attachment, nature of the attachment is emotional security, meaning that you are so attached to some person, you rely on him or her for your own self-esteem. The third one is what they call ambivalence. Ambivalence in psychology is what they call equal positive or negative feeling, or in layman's terms, love-hate relationship. You love somebody, but you hate somebody, and that is ambivalence. The third one is conflicts. Conflicts with the disease, meaning you could have argument, you could have been physically abused or sexually abused by the disease. So that is also one nature. And the third is most popular, okay, among a lot of people is dependency, meaning the weak depending on the so-called stronger spouse for a lot of chores, daily activities. So these are the 5 types of attachment. So by understanding what is attachment theory and by understanding what is nature of attachment, we need to look at what is grief and mourn. And you may have read many, Pastor may have explained over the last few days, but just for our recap, they are more or less the same, but yet they are different. What is mourning? Mourning is an external expression of loss. Like what we say yesterday, you have to wear a black shirt, or for the Hokkien, there's a patch on your so-called sleeves. So it is a process of mourning. But grief is an internal emotions during or after the loss. Okay, so it refers to a person's reactions to bereavement. For example, you long to be with the deceased. Okay, you have good but painful memories of the deceased. This is grief. But grief and mourning, they are closely related and they go hand in hand most of the time. What the book revealed to me is quite interesting. Actually, in our living life, we have to cope with grief every day. And what do I mean by grief? For example, when a toddler is separated from the parent, it grieves in a way. When we lose a precious items, nowadays handphone is very important. When we lose a handphone, we grieve. When we find ourselves lost, we grieve. But in our daily grief, we recover quickly from our emotion. How? Because when we found what is lost, or we found another replacement, so we recover quickly. But yet, during the death of a lost one, the recovery is a very slow process because there's no way we can bring back the loved one, our loved one, or there's no way we can replace. So this is how grief, can grip a person's life. And the recovery is a very, very tedious and slow process. Some people say there are 5 stages of grief. The book revealed there are 7 stages of grief. And this is not the first time I learned about stages of grief, because when my own brother passed away, it was my sister. My sister is a nurse in Canada and she works in the geriatric ward. And she told me the stages of grief. And I experienced it by observing people. So the 7 stages are shock, okay? Meaning you are shocked, it happened. Then you feel pain or you feel guilty, you didn't do enough. Then there's anger, angry with God, or you want to bargain with God. And then it will be isolations, you want to hide. And during the road to recovery, the positive part is there is an upward turn, meaning that there is healing, and then reconstruction back to your life, and then acceptance of hope. But the flip side of it is during isolation and depression, there is the downward spin. You get deeper and deeper into depression, and there will be destructions in their life. And ultimately, there's hopelessness and possible death. So my sister has explained to me, because in her geriatric work, they have seen many widow or widower committing suicide because they cannot get themselves out of the grief. And ultimately, it is a very sad ending. So by understanding the stages of grief, sometimes when we want to care for people, we need to understand at what stage they are at. And the book also talk about the 6R model of mourning, because as we know, mourning is a long process. Okay, these are the 6R: recognize the loss, react to the separation, remember and re-experience, relinquish the attachment. We talk about attachment, readjust, get the person back, okay, to the new life, and reinvest in new activities. Okay, as I say, this is through research and scientific modeling. Okay, and it is not a set rule, but it helps us sometimes when we want to comfort or counsel or just love and care for the living person. When is mourning accomplished? And cheekily the author asks, it is like asking somebody how high is up, because there is no limit. how high is up, there's no limit. But the author, they gives an indication that when the task has been dealt with and it can be revisited, what are the tasks? The task will be helping the bereaved party to accept the reality, help them to process their pain, help them to adjust or adapt, and help them to find a way to remember. Are these the so-called complete tasks? I would say no, but it helps when somebody is giving counseling, okay, that the bereaved party is going through this process. And this one to me, it makes sense, and even I experience it myself, but even myself or even observing. One of the benchmark of moving to mourning completion, we talk about closure, is when a person is able to think of the disease with less pain. It is not every day, less pain over a period of time. So that is more or less like a positive benchmark. And the book also talk about the difference between counseling and therapy. And we know that grieving, okay, even in a church settings, a lot of time the church gives support, the family gives support. Even we talk about social customs, it helps in the grieving process. But some people will have experienced very high level of distress or distraught, meaning that they cannot go through all the stages of grief. They just cannot pick themselves up. And this is where counseling started to come in. Okay. Now, again, I want to explain this book is written for professional counselor. It helped them, okay, to indicate whether a person requires counseling or therapy. So the counseling will help a person to adapt to the loss and then begin the journey of mourning. So the extreme case is there are people when they go through grief and mourning, okay, they go through very, very abnormal or complicated reactions, meaning it affects their physical health, it affects their emotional being, okay, and this is where therapy started to come in. So therapy could be even medications, okay, psychology counseling, okay, this is therapy. So sometimes we are confused between counseling and therapy, but what the author is saying that don't simply push a bereaved party to a therapist, okay. Therapist is like a very extreme case. The goal of counseling is very simple, or even when we want to care for those who love their loved one, help them to deal with the emotional behavior and help them to overcome the various impediments to readjust after the loss. Now, the questions that people always ask, even last night, in our DG discussion, when? When can you care? When can you, in a sense, counsel? The book say at the earliest, okay, a week or so, at the earliest. But they didn't say that this is the rule, as a guideline at the earliest. So there's no set rule on the timing because the bereaved person is still in a state of numbness or shock, and they are not ready. Okay, they are not ready, as we heard over a lot of testimony during the first few days or the week after that, they are not ready. Okay, I will, like I say, if there's time, I will share some personal inputs on that, my observations. Yeah. I'm coming to the end. The book highlighted a few principles. Okay, it helped, number one, help them to actualize the loss, and this is contradict to what we always like to say. Hey, don't talk about the person. Don't, is let him remain in your memory. Let her remain in your memory. But the author is saying that actually it's good, just to talk about the loss, to review the event of the loss. Okay, so it helped the bereaved party to come to the full awareness that it had happened. And the second principle in counseling or caring, okay, is to assist the bereaved party to adapt to the loss, okay, by facilitating their ability to live without the deceased and help them to make decision independently. And Again, for those recently bereaved, they should be discouraged from making life-changing decisions. For example, changing house. I made a mistake. I made a mistake. Okay, I can share later on. I made a mistake, but I'm learning. So from this principle, like I say, it dawned on me, my goodness, when I want to do all these things to help somebody, and yet I have stepped on so many potholes, and I make all the mistakes. Number three is help the survivor to identify and experience the feelings. Remember, we talk about the 7 stages of grief. Sometimes, if a person is angry, is guilty, is anxious, is helplessness, it's good to help them to identify and then tackle it one at a time. The next one is find ways to remember the disease through objects, through rituals, okay, through to remember their personal characteristics, to remember their shared values. That's why we see there's a lot of scholarships, foundation being found, trust being set up in a way to remember the shared value of the disease. The fifth one, I believe this is the most important, provide time for them to grieve. Okay, so there's a sentence there which I have struck out. Okay, you try to encourage people, come on, you have to go back to your normal life. No, this is not, because in a sense, you are not allowing the party time to grieve. And the sixth one is the key, allow for individual differences, because not every person grieve in the same way. Even when we talk about the 7 stages of grief, it is not in a descending order. Some people will feel angry first, then shock. Some people will feel guilty first. But the whole thing is, it is not a set rule that we must stick to it. But what I shared from the book, it helps us in a sense to identify, it helps us to realize, it helps us in a way to plan or to think wisely when we want to approach somebody. What stage of grief is this person in? What process is she or he in now? So that we know how to speak wisely, and we are able to comfort, and we are able to help them to recover and go back to their life. It will not be normal anyway. In a way, it is a new normal life for them. Okay, so I hope my sharing is, as I said, it gives you some insight in the area of grief counseling.